Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to SeaRUG on this chilly June Wednesday. It turned a little bit surprising all of a sudden, but thank you very much for joining us. Happy to have you, and enjoying some wonderful lunch over here that haven't gotten into it, but the dessert looks amazing. As usual, I will get out of here very quickly and get over to the feature presentation. For those that you don't, those of you who don't know me, I'm David Diars. I'm currently the board president for SeaRUG, and I also, in my spare time, I'm CEO of BuilderBox, which probably accounts for why I have no idea what day of the week it is, or what time it is, for that matter. We are very happy today to welcome Ideate Software as our sponsor, and to have Sash back as a presenter. And Ideate, if you're not familiar with all the comings and goings of the Autodesk VARs over the last year, Ideate used to be an Autodesk VAR, and they've been great partners with SeaRUG over the years. And they got sort of split, acquired a couple of other maneuvers over there. And so I suppose that we could say that it's technically the first presentation by Ideate Software as its current corporate incarnation. So welcome, and thank you very much for sponsoring for the first time again. Today we're lucky to have Sash come and present. Sash has been here before. He's a great presenter, and we're going to get a presentation on Revit templates and some of the things that you could consider standards to what you need in your template before you get going with a project in Revit. And this, for me, is pretty timely because I just dumped everything that ended in 19 and that started in Autodesk on all of my systems. So I'm going through that process of migrating all the stuff that I typically use up to 20. So I know this is something that a lot of firms kind of put off and stay on older versions for a while. Some of us are a little bit more early adopters, but all of us at one point or another have to deal with this kind of stuff. So this will be a really interesting presentation, and I think we'll learn a lot. Before I'm done here, I'll have to, of course, do the obligatory thank you to the rest of the sponsors. And just to remind the group that we are always looking for sponsors. If you work for a company that would be a good presenter here at SeaRUG and would have something compelling and interesting to bring to the table. We're not just limited to vendors trying to sell software, trying to sell products. If you have a recruiting need and you want to really show off the stuff that you're doing and why it's better than your competitors here in town, we're a great platform for it, so please let me know if anybody has any interest. And we've got, with us some of the board members. These are the people that get together and put together the agendas for the year and kind of set the tone for SeaRUG as it moves forward. And they all know who they are, so I won't embarrass them one by one. And stick around. We've got the usual couple of $25 gift cards from Amazon that we will pull out at the end. And just so that you know, you have to RSVP on Meetup, and then your name gets on the list, and I print it out, chop it up, put your name in an envelope, and we'll draw it out. So if you RSVP, that's how you get on that. Yes, that's true. We did ask to get locked in here this time, right? Finally, yeah. And I don't have a slide for it, but I was reminded earlier to bring it up. It's after the July meeting, so there's another opportunity to announce this. But what is it, Built NA? Is that what it's called? That's happening on the 19th of July. Is that correct? 18th, 19th, a conference here in Seattle. We'll have more information about it. And I don't know, is there a particular website that would be easy to remember? Do you know? Or? Yeah, Built NA. Just Google Built NA, and you'll have our very own Lana Gockenauer's got a class on it. I think it's titled something like "Why You're Always Failing at BIM and What You're Doing Wrong That You Should Be Doing Right," something like that. Anyway, check it out. It should be a really good conference, and you don't have to travel for it. So what's not to like? Anyway, without any further ado, let's pass it over to Sash and Ideate Software, and let's figure out how to update all of our templates to the latest versions, shall we? All right.
All right, this works. That's good. That's good. Welcome, everybody. All right, so give me 1 second here. Perfect. All right. How's everyone doing today? Super excited to be here, I hope. All right, cool. If anything, you got a good lunch out of the deal, so that's pretty good. All right, we're going to talk about some Revit templates and standards more than anything, and kind of some of the process for cleaning up your projects. And if you all know us pretty well by now, you know, Ideate Software is really focused on data editing and data management. That's really been our space for many years. As I always kind of remind people, we don't do, you know, VR or anything like that. So this has been kind of our bread and butter for quite a long time. And so that's why I wanted to kind of talk about this. And this is actually kind of timely for us because we recently released a new product called Style Manager that actually helps with the whole auditing and cleanup process of your Revit files. And I'll show you some of that you know, towards the end of this presentation, because if you are tasked with going through and cleaning up your Revit models, if you're just kind of doing things manually, you may be playing with fire. And I'm going to show you, so one of the things that I like to do, I guess, I like to break things. And I really love destroying Revit models. And it's because we have to do that internally to understand how we have to program our software. Because if we destroy your Revit model, you're not going to be happy with us. So I'm going to show you some horrible things that you could do to a Revit project. And one of them really caught me off guard a while ago. And I'm going to show you how to break it. So it's kind of fun. Why not, right? All right, so that's a little bit about me. I used to look like that. We were talking about beards earlier, so there you go, Lana. There's me without a beard. And I was a lot younger back then, so, but things have changed since then. All right, so here's kind of our agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about cleanup. The other thing I do want to point out is I'd like to get some feedback from the audience, especially those that are tasked with dealing with BIM standards, like how do you manage your standards? What do you put in your templates? How do you go about cleaning up your templates? And also, do you agree with some of the stuff that I'm talking about? May as well get this out there so that we can help each other out as well. So that's definitely some of the stuff that I want to talk about. I'm also going to talk about some of the content that I like to see in a template, because I used to build a lot of templates for the prior companies that I worked for. And of course, having done a lot of tech support over the years and having to receive people's Revit files, and you kind of get an idea as to how people implement their projects and their standards. It's interesting to see how everybody tries to solve these problems. So that's why I want to hear from you on some of this. We'll also talk about cleaning and purging, because this is a big deal. And this just isn't related to your templates, it's also your current projects. Hopefully everybody here is going through a process of auditing their models and cleaning them up. Because the worst thing you could do is have a filthy model and then try to upgrade it to the next version of Revit. We've had several files in the past that are not able to be upgraded to the next version of Revit because they have to go back and clean up the model. They have to clean up the warnings that are still in existence in their project. So we want to talk a little bit about that. Also, do you have some plagues? Or is your project or your template plagued, I should say? And I'll show you some stuff. It's really, really simple stuff, but things to be aware of. You know, just throwing things in your projects or in your models may not be the best idea. And hopefully everybody's vetting their content before they're just bringing it into a project and bringing it into a template. And then I will talk a little bit about how we use some of our software both in our templates and in our projects. All right, so let's just talk about real quickly, you know, what should be defined in your Revit template. And so one of the questions I have first before I show a list that I've kind of composed, I want to find out kind of from everybody, you know, are your projects created from a template, or do you like do a save as from an existing project to kind of go to the next one? And then also I want to find out like how many people are using more than one template. So does anybody want to start this conversation? Yeah.
We actually have our own add-in that forces you to start from a template. You actually can opt out, but the easiest path is to start from either electrical, mechanical template, whatever.
Okay.
And we actually have all the disciplines, structural, architectural, everything is all in there.
Okay. So you're using an app, right? Okay, so this app, you just click on it and
Basically, it activates when you hit new.
when you hit new, it runs that, and then it says which template do you want to use.
Yep.
And is that doing like a save as from maybe like a central model, or how does that work?
Nope, it's actually a template, it's actual RVP file.
Okay. Got it. Okay, so it's a project setup, essentially.
It basically, and then it actually gives you, it basically enables work sharing and everything. You can opt out of several of the different options, but by default, it puts you into a work shared
Got it.
startup model.
Okay, so it really is a project setup kind of situation. Okay, that's a good one. Anybody else want to weigh in on this? How are you guys starting your project? Are you starting with just a company template? Is it, or are you doing a save as from another project? Radu?
You guys start a project.
Okay.
You work shared.
Yep.
You file, so you document central save as a new project.
Okay, perfect.
Project name, and it has a set of things we want to have on our projects, and then we add to it.
Okay, perfect.
Some sheets created.
Okay, so you guys, so they're using a central file, which is their template, and unfortunately you still can't do RTE files for templates. They have to be a Revit project, but then it's safe on your server so nobody can accidentally overwrite it, I assume. You're doing a detach from central, saving as a new central, and then you're up and running. Okay, anybody else? Anybody taking an existing project that has a bunch of content in it and just doing a save as? Okay, that's good. All right, cool. How many templates are you guys running in your office? I hear a shh. What does that mean? You have too many? Okay. And is it for various disciplines, project typologies, that whole bit? Phasing? Okay. Got it. Who's using like one template? I like it. Nice. Nice. Who's using 2 templates? Okay. 3? 4? 5? I heard maybe 6. Did I hear a 6? That's a lot of templates. Wow, okay, cool. All right, well, that's good to know. So I'd say about 2 maybe is about the average. All right, so here's a list that I've kind of compiled. You can totally agree with me or disagree. That's the reason why I have a couple stars up over here. But here's kind of a list that I put together to kind of, I don't know, think about items that you want to address in your Revit templates, okay? So for example, let's just pick a few over here. Some system families, right? As you know, because it's a system family, you have to have at least one in there. There's no way to get rid of the last system family, right? Because that's how you make new types, right? So whether it's a wall type, some sort of system type, or whatever it may be, you have to basically duplicate that and then modify its properties from there, right? Same with component families. This is an interesting one. You know, when I talk to a lot of people, I think people kind of go in both directions with how much content they load up in their templates. I'm not a fan personally of loading up a whole bunch of content in my templates. And the reason why is, number one, it weighs it down. Okay, so, and the biggest template I think I've come across so far was about 500 megabytes. That is crazy. Okay, I mean, that you're starting off with, and you're giving people way too much, right? It's like giving a kid a bunch of candy. It's just not a good idea, okay? But the other thing, too, to keep in mind is I always think about, as I have to go through and maybe modify families, like standard families, so what am I going to do? I'm going to open up the families that are on my server somewhere. I'm going to make changes to those families, but then I have to remember to load them back up into my template, right? Where if you don't have a whole bunch of content in there, you can modify those families that are on your server and not worry about loading them up in your projects, right? So, or in your templates, I should say. So that's kind of the reason why I don't like to dump a bunch of content. Also, in my opinion, it forces people to go look for content, right? So I used to, define protocol for where you look for content, right? So you start off by looking in, for company standard content, and then, maybe you go look at Revit standard content, or you have content on a source that you're comfortable with. And the last place I go is, there's a few content spots online that you probably should never go to. One of them, I call it the Craigslist of Revit content. And it may start with an R and have the word city in it, right? But to me, that's like the Craigslist of Revit content. You don't know what you're going to get, just like on Craigslist, right? Okay, so that's how I kind of feel about, that. Browser organizations is another good one, right? Again, do you have a standard organization for your company? And then do you have browser organizations that are particular to a project or a typology? Those are the kinds of things you want to be thinking about. But some of the stuff that I've outlined here in blue are also things that you really, really want to be considering. And of course, this one is, you don't have to consider if you don't have the product, but there are some good settings that we have in our own products that can help you with your QA, QC processes, right? But things like line patterns, Those things are really important to get right, because if you don't get them right to start with, you're going to have lots of problems. Your project's not going to look good, and then you have to go back and deal with it. And I'm less and less a fan of transfer project standards. How many of you love transfer project standards? It's okay to admit it. Okay. The problem that I have with transfer project standards is you get sometimes more than you want out of the whole deal, right? And so I always am reluctant to say, well, I'll fix it with a transfer project standards. Maybe I'll go get the line patterns or line styles or something from a transfer project standards. That's a really tough one for me, because I've also run into a lot of problems trying to bring over like view templates through transfer project standards. A lot of times that becomes a big nightmare. So I use that very, very sparingly. How many of you in your templates have placeholder Revit links? Got a few folks. All right, this is something you want to consider. The one thing that I've never ever enjoyed, ever, was linking in a bunch of Revit files and then going in and dealing with all the visibility settings. That's a lot of work, right? And then, of course, you're going to make a view template out of that, hopefully, right? Everybody here is hopefully using view templates. They're awesome. They used to not be awesome, but they're awesome now. But one of the things I want to point out about having placeholder links is you can essentially create a series of dummy Revit files, maybe one for mechanical, one for electrical, plumbing, structural, whatever it may be, landscape, whatever it is. And then what you can do is you go in and link those up into your templates, and then you can go and set up some of the visibility settings and how you want them to behave. And then the cool thing about that is when you're ready to load up the real Revit files, you basically do a reload from, right? And that way you don't lose those settings that you have. So play around with that. It's an interesting concept, but I really like that idea. As a matter of fact, I even do a little research, and even Autodesk suggests that as a feature. So I highly recommend that you definitely look into that. Yes?
Any recommendations on how you do that if you're not sure how let's say I'm an architect, I'm going to work with consultants, I'm not sure how they're going to have set up their object style.
That's a tough one, right? So the object style, so the question was, if you're not sure how they're going to set up the object styles, how do you go about that? That's a good question. One of the things that I do is I'll try to get my object styles set up in line with what I think they're going to be, and the subcategories are your big enemy. That's the number one. We're going to talk about those today because that's a giant problem. But what I'll do is I'll set up the main categories, which luckily we all share that, right? That's the beautiful thing about Revit is we all share the same object style categories themselves. So I'll get that set up. You are going to have to go back and do some cleanup. You're going to have to do that for sure after the fact. So that's a great question, though. And then there are obviously other settings as well, right? View scale. Do you want to see when you link up a view? Do you want to see? Do you want the settings from the main view to apply to the linked element, or do you want the linked element settings to apply to the view? You can set all that stuff up ahead of time as well. As you know, there's a long laundry list of settings, especially for linked files. Great question. All right, let's see, what else do we want to talk about? All right, so we'll kind of, viewport types. Wait until you see what I have in store for you with that one. This is one I was telling you about yesterday. All right, let's see here. I think I lost. This happens to me a lot. Okay, so I got some questions for you guys. Looking at that list, what do you guys put in your templates? Or do you agree with the list that I have over here? Is there anything else maybe that you didn't see on this list that should be in a template? I'm all ears. Everybody's super quiet. It's perfect. There's no such thing as perfection, right? I always find templates to be an evolutionary process. You don't get it set right. You're like, oh, I got it right in 2003. I don't need to do anything else with it. You're always going to continue to update it. Yeah?
Something you don't have in there, and maybe it's a good thing that you don't, but I'm interested in your opinion, is groups.
Ooh, groups. Yeah, groups. There's probably a good reason why I didn't put them up there. But again, there are good reasons to have groups, right? Just as long as they're not called group 1, group 2, group 3. Don't do that. Please stop doing that stuff. But again, if you do have certain groups, like actually, there are good cases for that, right? So for example, if you're doing like multi-unit housing, right? Like those kinds of things, and if you set those up as groups, I can understand why maybe you want to get some of those standards put in there. I'm good with that. Yes, yeah, I use groups very sparingly. They're powerful, but they're not well managed a lot of times. From all the stuff we've seen come through, in front of our desks, people are definitely abusing groups and not understanding really how they work. So that's a good one. And I did put somewhere here on this list, I did talk about work sets. And again, in a regular template, you can't enable work sharing, but like what you do and like what I do is I like to actually use a central model and do a detach from that because I can preload it with some work sets and some visibility settings as well, right? I generally don't use work sets as a means of controlling visibility of certain elements. It's more about, do I want to have the ability to unload a Revit link upon opening a Revit project? Like those are the important things that I take under consideration. Anything else? Anybody else want to add? I can tell you want to. That's a good one. Darn it, I did forget that one. Export settings is a big one, and we're actually going to talk about that in a moment when we start thinking about loading up families that have imports inside of them. So export settings is actually a really good one, so thanks for that one. All right, cool. Great, let's move on. All right, let's talk about template items. Starting views. How many of you use starting views? All right, I'm going to take a guess here. About 2/3 here are using starting views. What do you put in your starting views? What's that? View naming protocol. Love it. All right, what else? Disclaimer. I love disclaimers. I actually have a disclaimer somewhere in here. Yes, disclaimers are always good, right? Like if this is not your project, close this file immediately, that kind of stuff. Or if you use it on your project, I'm not responsible for it. What else? The second one. Architects put a lot of disclaimers in a lot of things, but that's okay. What else do you guys have in your... Chris, what do you have? Cool. Unify, yep. So he's doing directory information. You can kind of do, I wish you can click still and get to a link. It's kind of annoying, but I guess it would be annoying if you keep clicking it and you didn't want to do that. But at least you can click the element and go find the hyperlink in the properties. Like those are actually a great idea. Put some of those in your starting views. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? The little, you could do a little question mark icon like what Autodesk does for their sample files. And if you actually click on them, they show you a hyperlink in the properties box. And then you can click it from there if you want to. That's all right.
Project information.
Yes.
To the front page. So as people are getting yanked off of jobs on and off all the time, more than just address, etc., it's climate zone and
cool.
Goals for the project,
yeah.
Sustainability and others, building code information that's required. Just like people are getting yanked off jobs and putting on jobs all the time.
Yeah.
You need them to enter the job and say, oh, that's right, this is a type 3 building.
Correct.
Oh, that's right. I'm in this zone or that zone, so I can't do this and I can't do that.
Yeah.
So it helps keep people up to speed on the project as well as
all this other. I think that's a great idea, right? So more than just basic project information like client name, client address, but having a whole bunch of information like the project typology, right? The construction type. Because the reality is people get pulled on and off of projects all the time, and if they just go into it and not really understanding what the project's about, they may not be doing things correctly. So that's good information to have. Hopefully people read the starting view. That's another, I mean, we always hope people read things, but I come to find out people don't read a bunch. So hopefully they will. Yeah.
We also put our model manager contact information in, not only for our model managers, but for other ones that are on the team. And we also put in our template version.
Got it. So model manager information, template information. I even over here mentioned somewhere I thought, basically, refer to the BIM execution plan, that kind of stuff for more information. Hopefully people are using BIM execution plans. I'll get you next on it, but yeah.
we talked briefly about considering sticky, adding a
Yes. Yes. I love it. Yeah. Yeah. That's perfect. So he's mentioning sticky. Again, for those of you that have sticky, why not? If you have a checklist, you can sticky that in there and make sure that, if whatever your checklist shows in there, if there's items that need to be reviewed, whether it's been checked or not. So you go back to Excel, you can put the information in Excel, and then it will show up in here. So that's actually what this is. This is a sticky. I put one thing in here, like, check your current Revit version, right? Because when we did a lot of tech support, people had, from project to project and company to company, people had all different builds of Revit. And it used to be, especially back in Revit 2015, if you were on a different build, it caused all sorts of problems. And so reminding people, hey, just check out what the most current version is. You're supposed to have this one. And if you don't, let me know. So that's where sticky kind of came in handy for that, because I could also have a master sticky for the entire company that as a BIM manager, I can go in and make a change. And then when anybody, as long as they have it linked in their projects, when they come in the morning, it'll be updated project-wide. So it's an interesting idea, right? So good to have sticky for that. Anything else? Lana, yes, sorry.
Project milestones. When is the SD and the DD due? And then who is your project engineer, internal company, project exec, salesperson, that type of stuff.
I love it. Yeah, exactly. Milestones, right? So, SD set's due tomorrow. You're working late. That's what it means, right? We know that. It's totally true, but let's admit it. Okay, cool. Great. Thanks, you guys. Really appreciate that. All right, so there we go. Oh, by the way, one other question I have for you guys. Do you do your starting views as drafting views, or do you put them as a title block? Title block. Who does drafting views? Move them over to a title block. I think it's way better, because I can then put sheet-based information in there as well, so that it shows up in these views. So I think that's not a bad idea. And then what you can do is you can filter it out in your sheet schedule, because you don't want that thing showing up in your sheet list. Not really good. But try considering that. So move it from a drafting view over to a sheet view. I think it will be pretty cool. And then plus, if you do have sticky, you could use it in there as well. If that makes sense. All right, let's talk about this problem right here. So we were just talking about object styles, right? What do you define in them? But also this has a giant effect on your CAD export settings that we had also just talked about. So, and I apologize, it's a little difficult to see. I can only make these things so big. But I want to talk about object styles. So here's just a screenshot I grabbed with the out-of-the-box Revit template. And what I wanted to point out over here, I just picked on the door category as an example. For the most part, the out-of-the-box Revit templates are stripped down to kind of a bare minimum, right? They give you a couple of levels, they give you a couple of views. And so when you expand your object style subcategories, they're pretty well organized. And these generally coincide with the Revit families, right? So as you know, or hopefully you know, and if you don't, now you will, when you load up a family into a project, if that object style exists already in your project or in your template, it will use the object style settings from your Revit projects. Okay? Just like AutoCAD, if you had layers and the layers exist in your project, you brought in a block and the layers are the same, it's going to behave the same way. Okay? But if you don't, if those object styles exist in the family but they are not in your project or your templates, those will then be appended to your templates, right, or to your projects. And this is where it starts becoming that really slippery slope. People abuse object styles like no other, okay? Where it also has a huge effect is what we were just talking about earlier that I forgot to put on that list, which is your export settings. How many of you here still have to export out to AutoCAD? It's a fair amount of people. So I'm going to guess about 47%, right? About 47% of you have to it looked about 47%. It was a quick poll, you know, but it's pretty stellar, yeah. I mean, we could get down to even finer detail if we wanted to, but we'll just round it up to 47%. This will also affect your output settings for your DWGs, right? And this is not a fun place to be. I get about 3/4 of the way down, I'm like, I'm done. Whatever the layers are after that, I don't care, okay? And part of the reason why is because the object style subcategories get too giant, there's too many of them, and then people still import and explode CAD files, and then it just becomes worse, right? Okay, so everything starts off really nice and clean. I cannot emphasize the importance of cleaning this stuff up in your templates before you start your next project. And I cannot emphasize the importance of cleaning it up now in your existing project. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But there is a direct correlation between these two right here. All right, simple, clean example out of the box. And I'm saying other templates are similar, right? Revit ships with, a few basic templates in there. All right, here's an example. I went to Knoll's website and I downloaded some of their families, okay? And I noticed when I loaded those families up that they were actually pretty consistent with their object style subcategories. I cannot tell you how happy that makes me, okay? So, remember we talked about the Craigslist of Revit content, right? That's probably some of the worst stuff to load up into your project, especially without vetting it, because you're gonna have all sorts of object style subcategories, right? So we're talking about a manufacturer here who probably has their own family templates with standard subcategories set up in the families. You guys with me so far? And then they start making stuff, and if they need to assign objects a subcategory, they'll do that. The nice and beautiful thing about this, I loaded up about 5 or 6 families into an out-of-the-box Revit template, and this list was very nice. And when you go back to the families and look at them, the subcategories are consistent. This makes me really happy. But you can do the same thing, right? I used to, and I don't do this as much, but I used to actually take some of the Revit standard family templates, and I used to modify them for kind of my own needs. So if I needed to make a new piece of casework, I would start with my own kind of template. But the reason why I stopped doing that years ago was because Autodesk would sometimes update the family templates, right? There may be some new information that shows up in those families, especially lighting. Lighting went through a redesign several years ago, and so I kind of stopped doing that. But having that consistency for those subcategories was really, really nice. Okay? And again, same thing for the export over here, you get a nice consistent list. So again, I cannot emphasize the importance of vetting your families. Don't just go download here and load into here. You want to download it, check the naming, load it into a blank Revit project, open it up real quickly, take a look at it, look at those subcategories, right? And if you don't like them, you can clean them up there. Okay, and I'll show you other ways to clean this up if you want to as well, but just keep that in mind before you start loading that stuff into your projects. Okay? So in this case, simple, well organized, and I'm also saying company. It just doesn't have to be a manufacturer, it's your content as well. Keep it clean, right? And why do we make subcategories? Anybody want to tell me why we even do object style subcategories?
You can manage things on, off, this, that, plus, minus.
Perfect. On, off, this, that, plus, minus. I love it. So basically, you're managing what? The visibility controls, right? Line weights. You don't want everything necessarily looking the same, right? I don't want to drop a mechanical unit in there and it's just one giant blob because everything's on pen number 7 or line style number 7, right? So you want to be able to have some of that finer control in there, right? So that's why we do the subcategories. But if you're just making new families, like, I'm going to make a subcategory. I'm going to make a subcategory. That's problematic. You should really ask why you're doing that and what's the standard for that. Okay, this is a borderline disaster, right? All right. This was a fun one because it was a door that had a site file inserted into it. A CAD topographic surface from a Civil 3D. Pretty cool, right? Yes, it really exists. All right, so you can have multiple manufacturers or content creators, right? And we were talking about exploded CAD files in families, right? So all of a sudden, this door thing becomes really giant. Please don't do this, all right? Please don't insert your Civil 3D files into your door families that are not going to help you out, right? Because not only are you managing, it really happens. This stuff right here, which is a giant nightmare to manage, just becomes a bigger problem over here, especially if you're doing CAD exports, all right? So this is an example of what not to do. All right, now, as I told you earlier, we came out with a new product, and when we do product development, we obviously have to research and test everything out and make sure that what we're developing is not going to hurt your projects or destroy them or change things on you, right? And so in that discovery, when we look at things like line patterns and line styles, we really find out that these things exist in a lot of places. So again, when you're creating things like line patterns and line styles, again, you want to be very much aware of what you're doing and what the impact is going to be on your templates and in your projects. So here's just kind of a list we put together of where line patterns can be found. And when I'm talking about patterns, I'm talking about things that are defining the line style, right? I'm not talking about line weight or the name of it. I'm talking about, is it a dash, is it a dot, what's the length of the dash, what's the length of the space? That's what we're talking about. This is kind of a long list of where line patterns can actually be found. When you start really digging into this thing, it actually exists in a lot of places, right? Number one is obviously the line styles, right? You make a line style which really consists of what? A line pattern and a line weight. That's really what a line style is, right? It's kind of like a layer, right? A layer has a name, it has a line type, it has a color, right? Same kind of idea when we talk about line styles. But then they're found in object styles, and even in the dimension styles, which is a whole other thing in and of itself. And in your views, right? Your phasing graphic overrides. So when this list starts getting out of control, this stuff starts getting out of control as well. So be very well aware of what you're doing here. I'll show you how you can clean some of this stuff up. Then we are actually talking about line styles, right? So first and foremost, this stuff's going to end up obviously in your line style dialog box, right? But then they're also found in your detail lines and your model lines and things like the masking and filled regions, right? My favorite thing, nested families, right? I don't really love nested families, but sometimes they're important, right? Even schedules, right? Because we're talking about the border styles. That stuff's all there, okay? And again, trying to clean this stuff up and delete it, be very careful what you're about to do because it will impact this stuff, right? I see Radu smiling over here, right? You got to be careful about what you're doing, right? Even the silhouette settings uses line styles. Line weights, who would have even thought it existed in all these different categories, right? So obviously found in line styles, right? When we define a line style, when we make a line, or I'm sorry, when we make an object style, you got to give it a line weight and a line color and a pattern, right? Also in your views, how many of you use line work tool? It's okay to admit it. And what do you use it for? Okay. So are you going invisible on that one in this case? Or are you trying to do a profile line? Okay. What else? Okay, show things above. Yeah, so how many of you know about that little trick that you can do to show things above, right? So sometimes what you'll do is you go into a floor plan. Let's just use a floor plan example, and then I would turn on a ceiling plan underlay, right? And then I may come in with a line work tool, and I'll use like the overhead line style as an example, and I'll start picking the edges. And then when you turn off the underlay, you'll actually see that, that ceiling element that you outline with the line work tool show up. It's an interesting one because when you hover over it, it kind of highlights the whole ceiling. But the nice thing about using the line work tool for as opposed to detail lines is if you change the ceiling and stretch it out, it will reflect it and keep that, that line override. So that's one example of a line work tool. Line work tool is super dangerous at the same time, and I'll explain why in a moment. Anybody else? Somebody else raise their hand. All right, we got two people that use line work tool then. All right. Oh gosh, I don't like fill patterns. So one of the problems with fill patterns that I run into all the time is they're named all sorts of different names, but they're the same pattern. Do you make like a 2x4 ACT and then make another one just called 2x4? You know, which one do you use? Do you use them both? Or are you just trying to do that for namesake, just to keep the naming consistent? How many of you do that? How many of you have like a 2-foot by 4-foot ceiling pattern, for those of you that are in the architectural side of things? Okay. How many of you just have like a 2-foot by 4-foot? Okay, so I prefer that because I can use it for multiple reasons, right? 2-foot by 4-foot piece of tile, it's kind of a big one, but in theory, I guess you could do that, right? It's a pattern, right? That's all it is, it's a pattern. That's all it is. So you don't need to create a whole bunch of fill patterns that represent different materials. They're just patterns, that's all they are, right? There's a reason why it's called ANSI 31 as opposed to some sort of hatch, right? Because it can be used for a multitude of things. Again, one of the things that happens is people start bringing in CAD files and they explode them, and then those things start infiltrating your projects. But again, fill patterns are found in a lot of different categories as well. So be very well aware of the impact that you're having in your models when you start creating or bringing in fill patterns through like transfer project standards as an example. Okay, we want to make sure that we're minimizing these and give these patterns a name that people will understand so they're going to be using them in their projects. They're easy to define, okay? All right, so I've used this chart a few times, and I'll get you guys a copy of this chart if you want to. because you want to pin this up next to your AutoCAD scale factor chart. All right? But if you want to get a better idea of how graphical hierarchy works in Revit, this is the chart to have. Okay? So one of the things I wanted to point out is the line work tool has the biggest impact on overwriting any sort of other graphics in your entire project. At the lowest end is actually object styles. You would think it'd be higher up, right? But phasing actually has a higher graphical hierarchy, or I guess overrides any of these settings in between, right? Especially when you go to like show existing plus new. But the crazy thing is, I could have an existing wall when I think about phasing as like a gray color, right? That's pretty typical, right? Or I don't even care if it's a wall, it could be anything for that matter. A structural column, mechanical equipment, electrical, it doesn't really matter. But then I can come with a line work tool and completely overwrite its look, right? So you have to be really, really careful when you're using a line work tool. That thing overrides everything, okay? So keep that in mind. So that's why I like to just kind of show this, because we want to be thinking about that when we develop our Revit templates and when we also think about our modeling and drafting behaviors in our projects. Any questions about this chart? You guys are really quiet. All right, we'll move on. All right, so I'm just going to show you real quickly just a couple of items in a Revit template. This is a work in progress. It has a long ways to go. But again, I just want to show you just a couple of quick things here. So let me just open it up. Okay, so actually in this particular location over here, I have two templates. One of them is actually the RTE file, and then the other one's an RVT. And this one here actually has work sharing enabled. And again, just a quick show of hands, how many people are using central files for their templates? 1, 2, 3, ooh, okay. And it's awesome, right? The only not so awesome thing about doing that is you can't access them from new, right? When you go to new, it doesn't show up in here because Revit's looking for an RTE file, right? That's the only bummer about this, is that particular file format. Because when you go to browse, it's looking just for this file format. Okay? That's the downside to using central files. But if you have special magical buttons that you can press to do it, that's awesome. Then you can just go with that, right? But in this case, I don't have any magical buttons to do that. Maybe I'll write one. So in this case, what I have to do is go to open, and I'll go find that file here. And then I'm going to go ahead and detach it from central in this case, right? All right, so here's an example of no project browser, so let me bring that up here. There's a reason why that project browser didn't show up, and I'll tell you that in a little bit. So here's just an example of what I had started off with in terms of a starting view. So this is actually just a title block family. That's all this is, right? And the reason why I like the title block family is I can basically put some information in here if I wanted to, but because it's a sheet, I can also get some other information in here, right? So I brought in some project information, some client stuff. This is one of the reasons why I really like using this. I can come in and I can make checkboxes, whatever I want. I can get really nifty with this, and I can put some work set information in here. One of my favorite things in Revit, the coordinate system. I love the coordinate system, and I really mean that. But so I want to talk about the Revit coordinate system information, other stuff. And in here I even talked about the Revit versions, right? But this is what I was talking about, and you had mentioned, gentleman over here had mentioned using sticky as well. This is actually a sticky which is linked into everybody's projects, right? So the BIM manager made a sticky and had company-wide information that gets linked into everybody's models, and it can go into the Excel file and do it. Or you were talking about doing checklists, right? Great idea. However you want to do it, it's totally up to you. One of the things I want to point out to you is that actually shows up under my sheet views over here. You can see I have a project information. I just gave it the letter Z. And that's pretty much what it is. And then I have my sheet index, which filters this out, okay? But you can see over here, it's a really simple setup, right? Other things that you want to kind of keep in mind in here are, how do you want to deal with your project browser organization, right? So I like to kind of do mine by view type. So how many of you do sheet views versus working views? Wow. And how many don't? And the rest of you are not sure? All right. So I'm a big fan of doing working views versus sheet views. You guys can see this category over here. So my browser is organized in that method. And what I do have is a organizational parameter that allows me to do that, because we still can't drag and drop views in the project browser, right? But what I like about this is I have my sheet views, which have view templates assigned to them that define the company standards in terms of how a floor plan is supposed to look, how a structural plan is supposed to look, or a mechanical or electrical or lighting plan, right? And then you can go into your working view, which is basically a duplicate of that view. You can go into your working view and put whatever notes you want on there. This project stinks, right? I don't agree with this. But nobody's going to see it when it gets printed out, because you're going to put your sheet views onto sheets, okay? So that's one of the reasons why I like it, especially if I'm doing drafted notes where I just need to put some notes to remind myself to do something. I go do that in my working views. So keep that under consideration. One of the things that I do like to do, even though I'm not doing it right here, is sometimes what I'll do is I'll make these kind of lowercase to remind me that those are more working views, and these are uppercase to kind of represent the view title, if that makes sense. Again, when you put a view on a sheet, you can use the name from the project browser or have it independently named when it is put on a sheet, okay? Other things that, as I mentioned before, I like to define my scope boxes, right? I have some scope boxes. I have, basic families in this family tree over here. These are the things that I'm talking about, right? And notice over here, I have these things named with my initials or my company name, right? These represent my standard families. How many of you guys do this in your projects? Or actually, I should say even as part of your standards. Okay, so this to me represents more of your standard content, right? It's an easy thing to do. Again, you can come in here, manually rename it, or rename in your families, or if you have like an Excel program that you can do it with, you can rename them in that if you want to, okay? But these are the things that I try to define in here. I don't put a bunch of content in here, and I keep things simple. The other thing that I like to do is I have even things like that, where I have a temporary section and a temporary view. And I made a custom family for that. And how did I color it red? With a filter, right? So if I go over to my filters, I have these filters for temporary, right? So you can do stuff like that, right? So these are all red and they're visible. And then when I come over to my floor plan, by the way, I wrote a blog post on this years ago, so it should be somewhere on the internet. Just Google it, you'll find it. But here, same kind of example, I brought up the filters, right? And then I can turn them on and off in here if I wanted to, right? And then you would apply a view template so that it locks that stuff down so you don't accidentally turn them on in this view. Does that make sense? So these are the kinds of things you can be thinking of and putting into your projects. All right, but again, don't load up a bunch of content in there. Also get your work set set up, right? So if I come over to my Collaborate tab, wherever that is, and look at my work sets, here's some simple ones, right? I see people with a lot of work sets. But again, thinking about putting my links on a work set. How many of you guys do that? Awesome. And the number one reason why you do that, especially for large projects, is so that when you go to open up the file that takes 30 minutes to open, you can say, don't load up these work sets upon opening the file. That's a huge deal. This is why I like to have a central file as a template so that I can get quick control of this. Okay? That's the reason why I like to do that. And you can name them however you want. I also put FF&E, being on the architecture side, furniture, fixtures, and equipment on its own work set, because I do like to actually control the visibility of it globally, and then I go to a specific view and turn that on in the views that I want to see it. That way when I cut a building section, whatever it may be, or create a brand new view, that stuff's not showing up by default. Okay? Please don't use work sets as a means of phasing. I have seen people do that before. So again, this template has a long ways to go, but I just wanted to kind of point out some of the stuff that you want to be considering for your templates. Any questions about that? Again, go back to that list that I had earlier and you'll see that information in there. All right. Is your template or project plagued? The answer is yes. Everybody's is. It's got something in it. It's got gremlins, right? Oh, wait until I demo this stuff. It's going to get fun. All right. So how do styles end up in your projects? Well, we talked about some of this earlier, right? So loading families will bring styles forward, right? We talked about that. If you go create a whole bunch of object style subcategories, that information will end up coming into your projects. And again, if your families aren't consistent, you're going to end up with a long list of these subcategories, right? Groups, bounded Revit files. Do you guys bind Revit files often? It's a little more terrifying than binding a CAD file, admittedly, but you can bind Revit files. So whatever you bind into your project, that stuff's going to end up in your Revit templates or projects as well. Actually, linking CAD, did you know that? Linking CAD is interesting. I'm going to show you an example here where even if you link it in and remove the link safely, it leaves residual data behind. I know, right? That's the reason why we use link CAD as opposed to import CAD. Now you're telling me, Sash, or whatever, that it leaves residual data, and the answer is yes, okay? Importing CAD, we know that's the worst thing you could ever do, right? On top of exploding CAD, which is the next worst thing you could do. TPS, and I don't mean TPS reports. I'm talking about transfer project standards, right? Or transfer project garbage or whatever it is. I don't like TPS. I'm sorry, I don't like it. Because it brings all sorts of stuff in that I don't want. And you know, you get that dialog box that says, do you want to overwrite or bring in new only? And you're like, I don't know, I'll click one of them. I just want to bring the stuff in, right? Because you're in a rush. Insert from schedule or a view, right? We've done that before. I do like that feature, especially with drafting views. That's why I'm a huge fan of drafting views. I love drafting views. I'll be even happier when I get a crop boundary for them. That's been my ongoing request for a long time. And then careless programming. It exists. You can find a lot of this stuff for free on the App Store, right? Okay, be very careful about what you download, right? Okay. So there you go, right? So that brings in stuff. And then we talk about imported CAD into a project. Pasted CAD, copy-paste information will bring in garbage. Notice I put a red X over there. That's a reminder, please don't hit that button. Okay, please don't hit that button. Matter of fact, you could probably program a button to go over that so you can't click. You know, I bet there's a way to do it. There's got to be a way to do it. Exploded CAD, oh gosh, it's getting worse. All right, imported, oh man, this stuff. Importing CAD and then blowing it up in a family, not smart, right? Exploded CAD, and there's probably other stuff too that I don't have listed there, so keep that in mind as well. Okay. So one of the things I want to point out to you is that imports in families, you guys have seen this tab before, right? Imports in families. And what that means is any imported elements that are in the family file, when that gets loaded into your project, it shows up under the Imports and Families tab. That's where that information is coming from. Okay, so again, you can see kind of a long list of stuff. And we can see over here, these A layers over here tell me they're definitely from an AutoCAD file, right? The AIA standard layers always find their way still into our Revit projects. Okay, and again, they will end up in your exports for your CADs. Okay, the other thing too to keep in mind, like which line patterns do you use here, right? Because as you explode things and bring them into your Revit files, this stuff's going to end up creating line patterns. And it just becomes a big problem. And then the problem is you'll go in here and be like, I kind of like that style. I don't know about these ones. I'm going to use that. And then somebody's used a line style that's not approved, right? It happens. It really, really does, okay? And then again, you're going to get redundancies in line patterns as well. So be aware of that, all right? I just want you to be aware of the horrible things about transfer project standards, exploding CAD files. This stuff will affect your project. And the reality is it's going to happen to everybody. No matter how diligent you are, stuff's going to happen. Also, layer names, right? So now what's happened over here is that the layer names have found their way into the line styles. And again, you may really like this setting over here as opposed to one of these, and you start using that stuff. And then you're not consistent from project to project or from family to family, so be aware of the CAD plague. This is one of my favorites, fill patterns. They just will bring, anytime you explode a CAD file and bring it in, those fill patterns carry forward. And what I love about it is sometimes they'll end up with a DWG file format at the end of the pattern name, which really helps. Okay, so again, you're going to get redundancies in patterns, and I'll show you an example. Okay, now here's where things are going to start getting interesting. In part of our little discovery of creating Style Manager, how does this happen? So this is a color fill legend. That is a color fill legend that's actually showing you multiple solid fills. You can't even create a solid fill pattern. When you try to create a pattern called solid fill with the same name, it's like, no, 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 no. How does this happen? Anybody want to guess? No, I tried. I tried making my own solid fill with the same name and exploding it. Didn't work. Probably could have maybe tried harder, but it didn't work. Anybody else want to guess maybe how this happened? I know, right? No, that's real. That is real. There's that many solid fills in there. Those are actually, that's a system pattern. The reality is, it's probably because of poor programming. Okay? Because even though you can't hit the new button necessarily and do it, programmatically you probably can. So you have to be very careful about, if you're writing software, using other stuff, be very careful about what you're doing. This is actually that dialog box from the same project. And look, one solid fill, but this has multiple solid fills. I'm going to show you a quick way to create multiple solid fills so they show up here. I'm going to show you the dirty way to do it. But it still won't show up in here as multiple solid fills. We came across a project, I think it was this one, where we found another one where it was a custom pattern, but you couldn't delete it. Something happened to that file. What's that?
That's just Autodesk.
Maybe it is. Maybe it is. All right, so let's show you some stuff here real quickly. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show you real quickly some of the impacts of loading up some families. So let me just close this. And I'm just going to go new here, just so we can start fresh. Okay, I'm going to open up a family. Okay, so let me just open up a family here real quickly, or actually it's a Revit project. This is even better. So let me just show you kind of what's going on over here. What I did is I just made a CAD file that had a hatch in it and some lines, okay? And then I put it in a door family, and I also put it in a mechanical equipment family, okay? So it's two families, totally different categories, totally different disciplines with the same exact CAD file. And in this case, those CAD files were imported, because you cannot link a CAD file into a family. Remember that, you can only import them. But they're the same exact CAD file, all right? So what happens over here? Well, in this case, if I go to the Manage tab and I go to Object Styles, and I look at doors, those layers do not show up in here. You can see that right there, okay? And the same thing with mechanical equipment. If I come down to mechanical equipment, these layers are not there. But if I come over to imported objects, you can see them right there. So that's where the stuff comes from. Really simple, okay? Really, really, really simple stuff, okay? That's at that kind of level. If I do come over here and look at some other elements like line patterns, I don't see any CAD file information show up over here, okay? And I can go look at things like fill patterns, and I don't see any CAD files in here. So that's pretty clean, pretty straightforward. Again, with the layering and the imports and objects, because these are the same exact CAD files, you're not getting a duplicate or a duplication of the layers under the import. All right, if I come in now, let's go to another one here. Now here's a situation where I exploded the CAD files in both of the families, okay? My list is getting longer, right? So now if I come over here and I go to Manage Object Styles, there's your imports and objects, as I would expect. If I come over here to Doors, now look at this. These are things that are like, oh yeah, I haven't looked at this in years because I haven't looked at my template in years, right? But this is just a tiny CAD file, but you can already see the effect of exploding CAD in your families, or bringing some CAD into the family, right? I mean, whatever it may be, but this stuff just carry forward right into your project. Imagine if you had a whole bunch of families with a bunch of CAD in them. This list is going to get really, really bad. And let's just make it worse. Let's go over here, and there it is. Okay, so now I have to manage it here, and I have to manage it over here. Did it show up anywhere else? Let's take a look here. Let me go to Fill Patterns. Looks good so far. That's pretty good. Oh, there's a Model 1. Ah, look at this. Same hatch pattern. I get two patterns now. I did something really interesting. How did it come up with 2 and 3? I was playing around with this. I'm like, what? They're the same thing. Like, just call it .dwg. Well, it turns out if you keep opening up that CAD file and you keep loading in a bunch of families, it keeps track of the different instances of it, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah, I know, right? None of this makes any sense to me. and it just dirties up your file. So this is dirty. This is just a dirty file, right? And it's a tiny little CAD file. All right, so be aware, again, of the horrible things you can do to a family. Okay, now let's just do a third one here. Oh yeah, this is getting a little more exciting here. So now we exploded it in the families. Notice the hatch pattern kind of disappeared. Okay, probably had to do with the hatch scale. Didn't work for that family, but then I imported the CAD file directly into the Revit model. So I have this separate import, not a link, and then I have the same families with exploded lines. So now what happens over here is, again, I come over to Manage, I come over to Additional Settings and Fill Patterns. It's pretty interesting, right? Okay, it didn't add another DWG to it because it's not exploded, all right? If I come over here and I go to Line Styles, not too bad, okay, not too bad. But take a look at this. If I come over to Object Styles, because two of those are in families and the other one is not, it's directly in the project. Does that make sense? This stuff's fun to play around with, I guess, maybe. All right, and I'll show you one more here because you can start seeing a pattern here. Let's do this one. Great. I should probably really pay more attention. Here we go, we'll just rename it. What's that? I know. Oh, no. Well, let's do it. Well, help me here, Revit. Well, that's a bummer. I can't rename this. Let me try going back here real quick. Well, I can't do it. I exploded the CAD file, and then what happened was the hatch pattern showed up under the fill patterns, in addition to the ones from the families, and then it also created line styles, okay, because the CAD files were exploded, so be careful of that, okay? Okay, what else can we do here that I wanted to go over? Yes, you guys ready for this? This is the fun part. Okay, so I'm gonna go open up a file here real quickly. Okay, here's the sample file that comes with Revit, just to show you how clean and vetted they are before they put them into into your package, right, before you download it and install it on your computer. Hopefully you're not doing a save as on one of these and using it for your new projects. I'll show you kind of an example of why you don't want to do that, but take a look at some of this interesting stuff here when my computer opens it. Hopefully the file path is less than 255 characters. Wow. Okay. I promise you it'll open. Okay, so take a look at this thing. So as I mentioned before, if I go to like Manage, Additional Settings, Fill Patterns, there's that solid fill, okay? It just shows one in there. But interestingly enough, let me just come over to, my German isn't good at all. Oh boy. Hey, look at that, what a guess. It just looked right. Okay, so take a look at this. If I come over to the color scheme of all places, and let me just go to rooms, name, that I do understand. What is up with that? We call that bad programming. I have a suspicion as to where it came from, but I won't mention it, okay? But this is a problem. And it's not just that, but you start looking through this list, and there are other ones over here, somewhere. Where did it go? Yeah, how did this happen? Look at this. That's not supposed to happen, but it did. It's because, more than likely, of bad programming. Is that bad? Okay, so now take a look at this. Let me show you something fun. I was playing around, because that's what I like to do, and I like to break things. So let me just start off with a, and you can go back to your office and do this to somebody's project if you want to, but I'm going to come over here and watch this. All right, so I'm starting off with an out-of-the-box template, right? And if I come to Manage and I come to Additional Settings and Fill Patterns, one solid fill, right? And let me just do something here real quickly. I'm going to come over here. Let me just do a room separation line, whatever it may be, and then I'll just drop a room in here. Okay, so now when I come over to Color Scheme, I'm going to pick Rooms just so I can get something to show up over here. Okay, one solid fill. Everybody see that? All right, this is a lot of fun. Anybody ever use select by ID? We're always diligent about selecting by like a known element ID number, right? Well, I'll just tell you right now, the element ID number for solid fill is 20. Yes, it is. I know, right? I found it, and I wasn't guessing, I found it. When I hit enter, look down in the bottom corner. So I told you I like to break things and do bad things. Now I'm just going to show you things you don't want to do. That's selected. It doesn't give you much information. I can get that information. We know how to do that from a programmatic standpoint. I'm like, okay, well, what happens if I copy it to the clipboard? And then I just come in and hit paste. And I was like, oh, darn it. Okay, fine. It won't let me paste it. But I was like, well, there are other paste options, like paste a line to current view, paste a line to current view, paste a line to current view, paste a line to current view. I can keep pasting forever. Okay. Then I go to Manage, Additional Settings, Fill Patterns. All right. Let me go back to that color fill, or that color scheme. Oh. Yep. Proof that somebody probably had in their script or their whatever it may be, copying the fill pattern, right, and applying it to something, not realizing they're actually creating more fill patterns. It's not good, right? Okay, so again, what I'm getting at is this stuff needs to be cleaned up in your models, okay? We have a way to clean it up. I'll show you at the very end. We're still good on time, right, David? We're just about there. Okay. All right, so I'll just show you a couple other things here real quickly. All right, so I'm going to come back to that in a bit. All right, so what's that?
What's ID number 1?
There is none. I tried that already. ID 21, element ID 21 is another fill pattern. It's like diagonal up or something. So yeah, but that's kind of cool. Element ID number 20. I don't think you can. See, now you guys are playing with fire. You won't actually. You can't do it. So if I come over to select by ID and I say 20 and I hit delete, I already tried that. Yeah, and you see it's grayed out over here. I try to force delete it with some of our stuff. Revit holds on to that pretty tight. But otherwise, it lets it go loose. All right, real quick, I want to talk about a couple things here. This is getting kind of to where we were at with the development of our software, about cleaning things up, right? So again, custom family types, you can purge that stuff out, right? Totally safe to do, right? Pretty simple stuff. Again, keep some custom content in there, but don't load up every single thing. One of the things you should also be aware of that is super dangerous, and I'll just mention it now, is let's say you load up a standard family into your template, all right? And then you go to purge it. So now you go and you're like, purge. I'm like, I don't need 1-inch thick drywall. I don't need whatever it may be. So you purge out a few of those types. Everybody's done this before, right? And the worst thing you can do then is hit Edit Family after you purge it, and then hit Save and overwrite the one in the server. You know what happens? You should be very careful of this. What ends up happening is the one in the server is now overwritten with the one that you just purged out, and now you don't have all those types that were the ones that were on your server. So you want to be very, very careful about purging and then editing families and overwriting the ones that are part of your standards. Always go to the family itself and do it that way. That's the best way to do it. So just be aware of that. Same with system family types. Purge them out if you don't need them. You have to obviously keep at least one in there. Revit is going to force you to do that. And of course, it'll force you to keep any other types that are currently in use, right? But things that get very dangerous, like object styles, this is really not good. So take a look over here. If I come over here, and I come back over to Revit, and I go to object styles, and I don't like some of the stuff I see over here. Not that one. Let's just do, okay, great. I'll just do that one. It says, are you sure you want to delete this? You're like, oh, well, no, but I want it gone, right? And it goes. What happens when you delete a object style subcategory? What happens? Well, you can't control the subcategory. Is that element delete in your families? No. When you delete a subcategory, it just gets rolled up into that. Revit didn't tell you what's going to happen. It just says, I'm going to delete it. Are you sure? Well, never sure. That's the problem with Revit, right? I'm not sure what's going to happen. I just selected element ID 20 and was able to copy it 1,000 times, right? Yeah.
If you do that and say you reload that family, will it bring that object subcategory back
Yes, it should bring that back in. Yep. But how often are we reloading those families, right? Hopefully once we load it up, it's kind of a done deal, right? So keep that in mind. But here's where things get wild, and this is kind of where we stepped in. Deleting fill patterns, line styles, line weights, that has a huge impact on your project, right? So you saw with object styles what it can end up doing, but you need to be very, very careful with deleting that. Revit doesn't warn you about a lot of stuff. And you're like, well, what's happening with that material that I just deleted? Is it becoming a default material? Is it removing it completely from my project? Like, what's going on with that? And that's where you have to be very careful about just deleting things. This is the point that I'm trying to get at. Just don't delete stuff, okay? And that's really what is leading me to this last part of this conversation here. This. How many of you have fought with this before? This has come up in conversations, come up in forums before, but a lot of times you're going back through your templates and you're like, I have a bunch of viewport types I don't want anymore. Now you can purge some of that stuff, but there's always that one nagging one that you want to get rid of. And then you try to purge it and you can't. And then you email people, you get on the forums, you're like, how do I delete this? Well, I discovered something pretty awful. And one of our customers did as well. All right, and watch what I'm about to demo here as another proof as to why you just don't want to delete things, okay? So Revit may give you access actually to the view title itself, all right, the viewport information, all right? And again, you could actually damage your file, which is what I'm about to do. I'm about to damage this file because, again, I like to break things, right? And that's why I came to this conclusion, just don't delete things when you're cleaning up your standards. Are you guys ready for this fun stuff? What can possibly go wrong? All right, I'm just about done here, just a few more minutes. All right, so here, I'm gonna open up a file that's got a problem. So much so that it's actually been purged out as much as it could possibly be purged out. This is gonna be so exciting. All right, so here's a file that's literally has got a grid in it and a few views. Okay, you can see over here I have some sheets, and they each have a view. And if I actually go to here and I select this, I just kind of made this viewport like delete this one, you know. Notice how this says like delete one. These are just what I call them, right? Delete two. You guys with me so far? All right, here's where things are gonna start going sideways. I'm gonna go to that nifty tool here called Select by ID. And I'm going to grab the very first viewport. As a matter of fact, if you want to find out, I'm going to launch BIMlink here. Again, you can find this other ways, but we actually have a link in here that lists out what your viewport types are. And I'm just going to ignore that. And right over here, notice it's not in use. There are 0 usages of that viewport. You see that right there? BIMlink is reporting it's not being used by any views. Okay, let's get rid of it. And notice how low that element ID number, it's not number 21, but it's 9835, because look at these other viewports here. They're a pretty high number, right? All right, so I want to get rid of 9835, which is actually the very original viewport in Revit. It's the main one, and you don't want to delete it if Revit gives you access to it. Check this out. Oh, this is going to be so much fun. I'm going to go to Manage, Select by ID, 9835. Lets me select it. And I know it's a view title because I can see some info here. And the first thing I'm thinking is like 7 instances. Well, wait a minute here. I have like 3 views on here and none of them are using that viewport. So that creeps me out to start with. All right, you ready for this? This is the fun part. Watch what happens when I hit OK. Looks innocent, right? Okay, I encountered an improper argument. And then, watch this. Let's try it again. I wiped out my project browser. I am not making this up. And you're like, well, Sash, why don't you just close the file and reopen it? Doesn't help. Why don't you close it and reopen it? Sure, let's do that. Let me go to View. Look at this, View, Project Browser. Look at this. It won't even open. And you're like, well, why don't you open up a new file? Okay, I'll go New. It's back. All right, now I'm going to come back over here, right? Brilliant. Except I'm in this project and it says Project 3. That is not the same project. It's not. This is really weird. Okay, now let's go weirder. check this out. I'm going to launch Explorer because I can't get access to this. See, if I come over here now, if I double click on this, it takes me to the other project. Is this bizarre or what? I totally created instability here. Because what I can do now is if I come over here, it says I have one sheet left. It says it's in the sheet list and it has a view, right? But I have no access to that. I can't get to any of this. And look, notice I'm selecting it. We're not picking it up. So be careful about what you delete because Revit will let you delete a lot of bad things or will just delete a lot of things that you should not be deleting. I'm telling you, not everything is vetted in terms of, from a programmatic standpoint. You can do a lot of things to make a file unstable. So when in doubt, purge it. So that leaves me kind of this last thing that I just wanted to demo here for you. And then I'll let you guys go. I'm just going to open up, in this project, there's not much you can do with it anymore. I destroyed the file. Because I tried, reopening it, auditing it, doesn't bring it back to life. It's pretty sad. Okay? So here's just kind of what I wanted to get at was, knowing what you can do safely and how you can audit your model safely. So going back to that list of stuff like where line styles exist, fill patterns, all that stuff, this is where we came up with Style Manager. So I'll just demo this for a couple of minutes here. But basically, this is the way you could safely look at object styles, where they're being used, and then you can make a decision on whether you want to merge an object style subcategory with something else or just wipe them out. And you see here, we even have a way to filter out imported styles. So for example, if I uncheck this, we're just going to be listing all the subcategories in your object styles dialog box. So then what you could do is you can come in over here and select several elements and say, I want to analyze them. Okay? Sometimes it can take a bit to analyze elements because what we're doing is we're looking for every instance and every usage of these subcategories. All right, but what we're doing is we're combing through the Revit database. So you can sometimes see Revit working in the background over here. And what it's telling me here is that this subcategory called 0, so if I come back over to Manage, Object Styles, and I look under casework, you can see right here. If I expand casework over here, there it is. Remember when I said when you delete it, it just says, are you sure you want to delete it? But you don't know if it's being used and where it's being used, right? Well, that's what we're telling you. It's not being used, so you can safely delete it, right? We'll delete it and we'll tell you that it was removed. But for example, this one here, which probably represents base cabinet, it's being used in 6 families. Well, maybe I don't want that subcategory to be in use. Maybe I want it to be part of cabinets. Well, the nice thing here is you can actually merge that style with one of either the main category or with another subcategory. Does that make sense? Then I can come in here and I can merge that. And what we're going to do is we're going to open up those families in the background and swap out that subcategory and they get loaded back in, all kind of under the radar. And then we tell you right here. So that has now been all taken care of and that object style subcategory no longer exists, right? So that's pretty cool. And things like view templates, we're like, well, I already know. Like if I come over to, if I come over to view and I go over to view templates, and I look at, let's say, architectural plan. Oh, that's not a good example. Here we go, architectural elevation. I see it's being used once in one place. It doesn't tell you where it's being used, right? So the nice thing about this is we'll list all your view templates and we'll tell you where they're being used, right? So like, let me take a couple of these right here and analyze them. There you go. There's that one usage and it's telling you exactly where it's being used. So you can make a decision whether you want to delete that view template or merge it with another view template. So again, this is what we do, right? We investigate data. We investigate where it's being used. This is why we do classes like these to help bring in awareness. And don't just delete anything. It can really cause you a world of pain. So use smart software, whether it's ours or somebody else's, but be sure you know what you're getting yourself into when you clean up your projects and your templates. So with that, you can find me online. I'm easy to find because of my name. There's not many of me out there. Find us online. And of course, thank you for your time. Thanks, you guys.
Excellent. That was really good. And like I said at the beginning, I'm going through migrating my own templates because of the 20 upgrades. So this is really timely, really good stuff to think about. Of course, I'm struck by the fact that probably 100% of what we talked about just now has to do with the way that things in Revit look like on paper. And that's where I get on a little bit of a soapbox. But then again, I recognize that I'm in a privileged position that I haven't had to care about paper for a number of years now. So I know a lot of people still do, but should care about the model, the 3D representation, and the data. But that's just my thing. Anyway, let's give away some money, if you don't mind.